Welcome to FOB TV, the future of business. I'm your host, Kevin Benedict. I'm a futurist and lecturer here at TCS, and I want to welcome everyone to the show today. Now, I'm particularly excited about this episode because I just got back from Finland, and it was my first time to Finland, and I discovered, read, and learned so much. And today I get to introduce our guest, who's Amos Taylor. Amos, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Really great to be here and great to see you again.
Now, Amos is a futurist and project researcher at Finland's Futures Research Center. Tell us about that, Amos.
Yeah, so Finland Futures Research Center is in the University of Turku. Turku is the other big city in Finland, but actually I'm in Helsinki now. And we have the kind of Department of Turku School of Economics. It's one of the oldest academic departments in the world focusing on future studies. But we are kind of a project-based. This is also the thing. We have a very broad range of topics. And as a kind of a project researcher, I am then on board of lots of projects, or 2 or 3 at a time, usually. And you often new topics, yeah.
Short story, when I was in Finland, I posted on LinkedIn a photograph, which I thought was a really good photograph, and was just sharing that I'm in Finland kind of thing. And Amos popped up and said, I work in that building. And that was awesome. So we were able to, matter of fact, connect and meet while we were there. And it was a joy to make your acquaintance, Amos. So tell me, what's the weather like in Helsinki today?
Yeah, actually, the spring, the first kind of touches of spring. We had this what's called takatalvi, which means like the return of winter suddenly came, and then there was snow, which is not untypical here. But then we have the kind of spring.
Now, for those of you that are not familiar with Finland, Helsinki, which is their capital, matter of fact, is about the same latitude or a little bit north latitude than Anchorage, Alaska in the U.S., just to give you guys some perspective. Phenomenal. When I was there a few weeks back, we actually had a whole 10 days of nice weather, no snow even. I think we had just a couple little flurries, but the rest of the time, sadly, because we brought our snow boots and everything, we just ran around in tennis shoes. But so tell me your journey, Amos. How did you end up a futurist?
Yeah, this is kind of a funny thing. I think future studies or becoming a futurist, you usually come from different backgrounds. You bring your own baggage and you kind of discover that this thing called the future and where you can apply your own background. But I guess I was interested in different things, and I started when I was studying production design, so film and theater, scenography, and art direction in Central St Martin's Art School in London. At the same time, I was working at the British Antarctic Survey, building equipment. That was my kind of wow. So I had this kind of deep, hardcore, gnarly science. And really tangible science. People were calling because at that time, the 90s, they had discovered the ozone hole, and Antarctica was there. They were monitoring it there, and people were worried, rightly so, but they were worried, is there something coming right now? And yes. Should we be really worried? But so this kind of balance of and broad approach, so being creative, and not. And then, I ended up in Finland. My grandmother happened to be Finnish, and my father moved to Finland, and so I kind of followed it over and after studies, and continued to study in Lapland in media culture. So somehow, there was a media lab there, and I was interested in the future of creativity and what platforms we need. And I ended up teaching for a while. I saw these future studies courses, and eventually I ended up within our department, we have a PhD program as well as a master's program. And I studied in the master's program and quite quickly joined into projects. And so I've been here for about 10 years. And
that's lovely.
All kinds of topics. Yeah.
What a great story. Hey, so the reason why I really reached out here is because I'm beginning this series on happiness. Now, I know you guys in Finland won't appreciate this right now, but us in the US are experiencing some high anxiety times. There's a lot of fear, there's a lot of distrust, there's a lot of worry and concern. And so I don't think the US would rank on a happiness chart very high anywhere. And so at this time, I said, what better time than to try to do a series on the future of happiness? And what better place to look than Finland? And guys, let me just tell you out there why Finland's the place. For 8 straight years, out of all countries around the world, Finland has ranked #1 in happiness for 8 straight years. What's Finland's secret, Amos?
Yeah, that's a funny thing because people are also here saying, what? We're not happy. These kind of Finns are quite very stoic.
Yeah.
And maybe not the warmest first initial contact, but they are generally, I think, very warm. And of course, that's a generalization. But still, people are quite quiet and reserved, and they like their space. Finns really like their space between, and people waiting at the bus stop, they kind of like give each other space. I think the fundamental thing is that there is kind of a trust. Trust is something that is throughout, although I would say it's a difficult topic currently. Regional elections happening, and so this kind of topics about mental health issues and inclusiveness are there. Even though I would say that Finland has this kind of a very strong infrastructure of happiness, and I think the index, the happiness index, is kind of very broad. So it's not only like asking how happy you are. But I think, what was it? They ask about healthy life, expectancy at birth, social support, freedom to make life choices, generosity. Can you kind of donate to charity? Can you support others? Perception of corruption in government or business or wherever. And I think that the positive things are then people are quite trusting of the government, and journalism, for example, is very, very strong. So there's a kind of generally, I think that they're quite high level of media literacy, although it's still a challenge. And with social media, it's increasingly a challenge, especially with youth. And I would say that there's also a kind of big counterforce there, that maybe this kind of measurement doesn't take into account. But equality is maybe a big thing there. That, for example, if I would think about, there's generous paternity leave, for example, and healthcare and education, but of course pay high taxes. But those things are kind of generally covered. And I would say that maybe an example of when you have kids, then education, kids very early on go to kindergarten, which is often state-run or regionally run, and they are almost free, depending on your income. And children automatically have to go to preschool as well. There's at the age of 6, they kind of have to get ready. A very good system, because then even if you're unemployed, then your children can still go into this. So it kind of gives this structures that you can then concentrate on other things. So it relieves the burden.
Education is largely free, and healthcare is free, and there's maternity and paternity kinds of programs.
Yeah, we have quite many months for that.
So if I understand this, Amos, a lot of the areas that in other parts of the world, like the US, we stress, that's high stress areas. All of those. How are we going to afford to get the kids in school into the right schools, and our medical costs, all of that stuff is high concern, high anxiety for the US. But that's kind of removed from a concern for you guys. Is that true?
Yeah, in general, but of course, what is it? The kind of a joke that the most expensive hotel room you will stay in the States will be in a hospital.
Yes.
So, but here those costs are cut considerably. They're not free, but they're really minimal. And they're increasing the prices. So of course, some people will complain that it's not the same as it used to be. But no, those kind of things are not a stress. Although I would say that the welfare state is in a kind of a stress. It is corroding. It's not being supported. It's being made more efficient, which means they cut it downside. So it used to be all the municipalities. They would have like a hospital or a medical center very nearby, and now and across Finland, which is quite a large area, then that's quite inefficient to do. It costs lots of money, but then that was why we pay taxes. So the idea has been to cut these down, and they've made this kind of new plan.
So according to the happiness index, they are the happiest, but happiness isn't necessarily laughing all the time. Happiness can be content with a position in life. Now, there's some other things that I learned about Finland here, just from my personal experience. Amazing coffee and pastries. Let's see here. Incredible salmon soup. Yep. Wonderful breads. There's islands by the thousands to explore, and everybody seems to go to the islands on vacation. There's thrift stores everywhere. There's amazing mass transit everywhere you want to go. There's a world-class library. There's massive forest and over 180,000 lakes. Matter of fact, 10% of Finland is a lake. That's an incredible number. Out of a population of 5.6 million people, there are 3 million saunas. So when we talk about happiness, maybe there's some happiness that's coming out of a mixture of some of that as well. What do you think?
The culture aspect, of course. The culture aspect there is very, very strong. And the culture is often overlooked. And that's actually one of the projects I'm studying is on creative culture and creative industries and kind of looking at it at the ecosystem. So I would say you mentioned also the library, the Nordic library, which is it's kind of metaphor for this kind of happiness, well-being, because they make it's dubbed as the living room for the city. So everybody can come there and be. So it's open and inclusive, and it can be anything. It's not only a library. People are working there a little bit and testing like new 3D printers, new technology, and they have little robots taking the books around, and it can be events, but not political events are not allowed. So it's somehow then everybody is included in there. It's actually very dynamic. They kind of like move things around continuously, so it becomes this kind of focal point. And I think those kind of systems, then the things are offered. There's no barrier to entry, and I think education as well. There's very little barrier to entry for education. Some studies and some schools are more difficult to get into than others, but once you're in, then it goes quite well. And I think the students get also benefits, so you can live quite well as being a student.
Let's just touch on that library. I spent some time in there. It looks like you can check out musical instruments. You could check out an electric guitar and take it home.
You can. They have all kinds of things, and sewing machines you can use. That they're also with this idea of the kind of right to repair, which is this kind of new EU move to kind of that you should be able to repair things. So there's lots of kind of a maker movement there. It's really interesting to see. So I booked. Was it a couple of weeks ago? I booked. I had a lecture that I had to give for some guests and some students coming from Germany, and I thought, okay, I'm going to book the library space, and you can book it. You can book a room there for like a couple of hours there, as long as you use it, as long as it's and you have the right amount of people coming there. And it was seamless. And then the next people came along, and actually Zelensky was visiting in Helsinki on that same day. So there was suddenly massive amount of military presence in the building, as well as lots of guests and tour groups coming past, and they were popping their head in and asking, "So what is this?" I had a big slide on sustainability and AI and what's the future of AI and sustainability.
You know, one of the other things I noticed when we walked around the library is we came into the big open room, and it was full of dozens and dozens of baby strollers. And there were toddlers and infants everywhere, and their mothers were sitting around, and it just looked so pristine and beautiful. Yeah,
it's a really popular place for toddlers and young children. They can kind of meet and play and explore, and they read stories there, and there's usually quite a lot of activities. But also, other people also like to then hang out there as well.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
It's an interesting mix. And I talked to the head librarian I interviewed one time. He was explaining how this goes, and he said, "We don't like a kind of like a place where the furniture anywhere really. They somehow like seem to evolve and move around on their own. They just kind of like watch what happens. So it's its own kind of ecosystem. Of course, they cultivate which parts could be like this, but the actual tables and chairs, he said they kind of like seem to move on their own."
And, you know, I want to just share that this library is not small. This library is massive. I mean, you can barely see the other end of the library. And it's art. It's a work of art and all of this. So, the library is just world class. That's for sure. Now, so we've talked a little bit about Finland's safety net and the role it plays perhaps in that happiness index, because a lot of the most important requirements that us humans have are covered within that safety net, or largely covered in that. And let me just read through some additional rankings here of Finland. So in 2024, Finland was ranked 15th out of 67 countries in the IMD World Competitiveness ranking. That's important. In the 2017 World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Report, Finland was ranked 10th globally. And Finland has only 5.6 million people. It's the size of, like one U.S. state. I think Washington state in the U.S. has 8 million. So just to give you a relative size, yet they're ranked 10th on the competitiveness scale. In 2022, Finland ranked number 1 among EU member states in digital competitiveness across the 4 dimensions of connectivity, human capital, integration of digital technology, and digital public services. Amazing. In 2019, Finland was ranked 7th globally in the Global Connectivity Index. How can Finland have both this strong safety net, Amos, and yet be so highly ranked on the competitiveness scale? A lot of people in their head said those are diametrically opposed. If you have a strong safety net, you don't have the motivation to go out there and be competitiveness. But in all these rankings, you guys are in, at the top percentile in that. Why do you think that?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting. Well, I think that there is this this idea that all the social security benefits and services are kind of deeply interlinked. So you can think of this as kind of a wider resilience. So they kind of offers a kind of wider resilience, and some of it is based on residence. So not only citizenship. So that you're a resident, so you get automatically these kind of services, and then some are based on your employment. So then you get your pension and things connected with those, or occupational health and those kind of things. So there's within organizations, there's quite strongly this idea that they also kind of create these different types of support systems. But then how to be competitive. So then that releases, you're encouraged then to a little bit exploring new possibilities, innovation. yes, Finland is very innovative. There's lots of testing, inventiveness. So actually, like people talk about entrepreneurship quite a lot, but they a little bit forgotten this word of being an inventor, because know, and I think that's also I think many entrepreneurs are actually inventors. They're not necessarily amazingly business savvy, but they are able to kind of like identify a need and create it. So I think Finland has quite a lot of that, but Finland, compared to some other countries, also are not very good at selling those, kind of bringing them directly to market. But Finland are quite early adopters with technology, digital technologies, and so it's like kind of like a big little country, so you can kind of test at scale quite quickly, and adoption is quite quick, and because the infrastructure is already there as well. The motivation is there because of the safety net.
I wonder how much of that is related to the fact that Finland is so forested, so surrounded by water, surrounded by lakes, surrounded by islands, and how important that is to the Finnish culture, and then how you guys are also the leaders in sustainability. Do you think there's a correlation there?
Many people have cabins, or anyway, they use the nature quite a lot, and Finnish cabins are quite independent. They're very primitive. Many haven't changed, but in our eyes they're very modern, because they're all double glazed, and they've had double glazing since since 1930s or something. It just and they have very they have really kind of ideal ways of how things work, and they're not necessarily needing always electricity, but many do have. So this kind of self-sufficiency, and kind of not worried about that. So these like modules are self-sufficient. Another example is, Finns really like forest, but so the forest industry is very massive in Finland. It's very innovative, but it has this other side to it, which is that many Finns are forest owners. They have lots of plots of land, which is a forest, and some are active. They really use it, or they want to go there, and others they are able to kind of sell the wood or cultivate it or grow it more. And manage it. They should manage it more, some don't. But because each one have kind of different reasons, they act as a kind of a buffer that you can't make kind of sweeping changes like that. Okay, we have a big factory and we need this amount of wood. Let's take it directly. There's a buffer there, so it becomes this kind of like locals then can decide, is this good or not? It becomes this other kind of ecosystem. There's a different type of innovativeness than growth, I would say.
So let me just ask you about work-life balance. You might be forgiven to assume that because Finland is so ultra competitive, that perhaps their work-life balance might be way out of sync or way out of line. You're working too much. But tell me how it really is in Finland. What's the culture?
There's hierarchy, really. It's quite minimal entry connection with leadership or the pecking order. People know what they need to do. Again, this kind of idea of trust. People work really hard, but they don't work very many hours. And they also then really like their own time. But when there's a deadline or something like that, I think Finns are very good at meeting those. They're very, very punctual. You can email directly to your boss, for example, or to your boss's boss, or you're trying to get in contact with somebody. You kind of go directly to the source. I think this is kind of a common thing, and for some cultures that could be also quite abrasive. Like, why did you not go through the ranks and
Tell me if I understand this right. Reading about Finland, one of the things it said is that you typically the office thins out very quickly after 4 p.m. in the afternoon.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Now, I also understand most people that are working have 5 weeks of vacation a year.
Yes. Yeah. So there is some, like midsummer, for example, is a kind of holy time that you won't get anybody at that time. And also a lot of July suddenly goes quiet. The calendars are completely cleared for that. And if you expect to have a meeting then, well, it's going to be really, really hard. But that also a little bit should change for some businesses, and it could be like something that could change. But it's a kind of good example that also, if you think about the school children, their homework amount is quite managed. So they do have homework, although it's usually advertised that Finns don't have homework at school, but it's quite minimum. It's moved to more self-study, some parts, but this homework burden, I would say, is quite minimum, and they still have quite large playtime especially for the young. There's a big amount of that coffee culture, and somehow there's this kind of closeness. I've also seen online there's this kind of trend in LinkedIn, for example, that people say that your colleagues are not your friends. I'm thinking that in projects, if I don't have a repertoire with somebody, then I'm probably not going to be working with them. And I would feel terrible if somebody has a problem, even their home life problem, that they couldn't discuss with me. Then that would be wrong, So because it's easily fixed, and so I think this type of hierarchy thing, you get past these kind of problems quite quickly.
Interesting. So let me just summarize some of this. So there's a very great respect for personal time. So and children are not given a lot of schoolwork because playtime is valued and family time is valued. I was reading some of that. And the midsummers are almost holy. People keep those open. So, I mean, it's just an interesting cultural environment. And what you're saying there, too, is there's not a lot of hierarchy in organizations. You have freedom to be able to communicate up and down the hierarchy that you do have there. These are all cultural things that have served you guys well. That's interesting. So in the U.S., we are always struggling because, the marketplace is king. Everything is ultra competitive. But what that means is that kind of naturally built into there is this expanding gap between the rich and poor. And it's a struggle, and it's unfortunate, and it bites us in the butt so many times in the U.S. because of that. But how does Finland manage to keep the country and the culture kind of egalitarian?
I mean, if we're thinking about the future also, this is something that is slowly changing as well, that Finland hadn't really it's not within Finnish culture to be too show off and things like that, because everybody somehow are fairly equal anyway. So you have a nice handbag. Well, I could have a nice handbag too. It's there's not that kind of admiration. The school system, for example, has been, well, wherever you are is a good school, usually. And I actually believe that there are really good schools everywhere. The local school is the best school you could possibly have. But now more and more there's kind of like branding special schools, and then you get this kind of a prestige with some schools and not other schools. The university as well, so you can think of that. Although I would still say that all the universities have really good rankings and really good, making a new tax loophole basically for an inheritance tax. So there has been always an inheritance tax. And so now they would be taking that away. And they have been saying, well, that will kind of free up the money and it can flow more for people. But really, generally, that benefits like a very tiny percent of very wealthy people, and not the other side. The Helsinki is a very expensive city as well. So housing prices have shot up, but salaries have not necessarily increased at all, especially not within university systems either.
So Finland is not without their challenges as well. Let's just talk about those. When you have a strong safety net, when you have a very competitive environment, when you're rich with natural resources, and the culture values family time and time outside of work. All these things are good, but what's the struggles? What are the big struggles that Finland is trying to address right now?
Yeah, well, I guess one is integration. So they have this idea that there's a massive need for immigrants, and there's an aging population, so and low birth rate. So Finland needs to kind of grow and not decrease its population. Also, then there's pushback. Well, they would be coming, and there's been certain incentives to attract kind of highly skilled people, but Finland has been a little bit slow also. Sweden was much more advanced in this. They were kind of an early adopter of integrating, but they also have huge problems in
Yes.
integration. So, and we seem to be also like then following the similar kind of path. So there's been the discussion more about how to, because Finnish language is also very difficult. It's one of the most difficult languages. There's these kind of barriers and certain kind of cultural barriers, and the job market also then is still fairly naive to so this kind of trust level kind of like is working very well within a normal familiar Finnish setting, but then not necessarily always. Especially in Helsinki, there's lots of really great examples of very successful immigrants and integration and so they're the stories that need to be focused on.
Yeah. So immigration is the same challenge that every country seems to have, especially on the Western countries, US included. We absolutely need workers, and we need to add more people to our the workforce so that we can have the services we want. And I know just across Western Europe with the low birth rates and the elderly, we need more and more people coming in to support our economies. Yet at the same time, it changes our culture if the immigrants that come bring in their own culture and they don't integrate well. It's the same challenges we all face around there. And so then you have the side that wants to resist immigrants and the side that wants to welcome immigrants. But we all know we need the people in the workforce. So how do we do that? It's one of those grand global challenges out there. Wow. So let's talk about everything that Finland is doing right that makes it 8 straight years #1 on the happiness. How will that continue into the future? So if we look forward, we know there's challenges because it's hard to have a strong financial safety net when there's a diminishing population. That's just a struggle. Like, how do you pay for everything if you have a small workforce? So how do you continue this happiness into the future? What kind of ideas does Finland have?
Yeah, I think there was a recent seminar or it was a workshop at the government that I attended, and it was talking about future generations, and I've had some projects on future generations, and it's kind of a similar kind of future generations is a good topic because it's something that everybody can come in on. So when we talk about strategic foresight or foresight, then it's quite specific. But then they were talking about what is the future of the welfare state. And so we have to kind of it's building on this idea of that a citizen then is able to get resources, and this is bound to kind of like a collective wealth and but then this happiness part is somehow like a little bit missing there. So where is the kind of well-being or the wellness aspect there? And that's then connected more with sustainability or more with the environment. So it's kind of within an environmental setting. And there was more discussion about this kind of like, it's kind of a shift. So if the welfare state could be somehow like reimagined in that way, but what's happening is that a lot of the services, have been kind of outsourced then and privatized. So when you do that, then there is the risk that it's not following this same model. It's difficult to kind of make this kind of grand picture. But in Finland, they actually do quite a good job with thinking about this kind of wider issues, or kind of interconnected overall resilience. So you get resilience from all the different parts rather than doing one thing. And cybersecurity report just came out also, and it was like talking more in this kind of way. Yeah. And this kind of infrastructure system to kind of shocks and crisis, then they have been thinking as widely as possible, and that's a futurist approach to do that. And for example, within the government, there's the Committee for the Future, which is a special committee. There's I think 17 different committees, but it's a permanent committee that's always there, and with members from all different parties. There has to be members from all different parties there, and their job is to kind of look at the issues that are coming for the future, and then they ask experts to kind of inform them, or they commission studies. So this is where the kind of you're able to kind of identify kind of happiness. But interesting also that we did a Delphi study on the future of work and this kind of happiness. Where would you like to work? Because we were thinking about the spatial aspect, and people were like, okay, yes, in the nature or on the beach, I would like to work on the beach. Or then some people were like, I want to work in the office because the office is where our work is done. And the others were it's I want to work wherever people are. So they were also like connecting this idea of this work-life balance. And work-life balance was very clearly in this Delphi study. This is where Finland will find the answers, and that you kind of have to ask the questions. So if you don't ask the questions and broadly engage, then you don't find any kind of the answer. It's not one answer. It's then, and you're able to kind of adapt. And I think Finland is very, very good at adapting to different shocks. With COVID crisis, they were quite lucky, but they also adapted quite quickly.
You know, this is inspiring, the story of Finland, and what you guys have been able to accomplish, and the fact that it functions. And according to the happiness scale, you guys are still up there. But that didn't happen by accident, did it? There must have been things over the past 50 years that Finland, on purpose, with a plan, did that got you to this happiness ranking. What are your thoughts there? What, if you look back over the last 50 years, what did Finland put in place that got you to where you are today?
Well, one basic one would be this social security system called Kela, which is kind of it's a social security fund. So they're an independent kind of commissioned fund in which they collect taxes. And they look after kind of a broad spectrum of social needs. And that was put in very early. And also basic things like school lunches, often sometimes breakfasts as well for free. So these kind of things, give you a head start. Yes. So there's lots of little things that here we take those for granted, but they have been for a really long time. I think that even in the Helsinki area, there is also, during the summertime, in the parks, they have also this kind of park lunches, because then those kids need to eat and they're free.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think it sounds a little bit like socialism, but it's not. It doesn't work in that way. Then people who want to support this kind of thing, even if they don't necessarily need it themselves, but culturally they're going to it, and then people who then do really need it, then they benefit. So everybody somehow benefits. I think this is where the keys for that kind of future are. But trust in government has been quite a long time also. There's been quite high level of trust in government, and kind of more openness and debating, and that's connected then to open journalism, a very strong history of journalism within Finland. And I think that, and then education, of course, is tied in with that. So I think those are for a long time key things. But Finland also paid the debts from after the war. They had to pay a heavy price for its kind of involvement in the Second World War, and they were one of the few countries who actually paid that. So they were behind then. So they had to do a massive rebuild after the war. Then you have these kind of visionary architects like Alvar Aalto, who of kind of modernization of Finland. So Finland became this kind of modern country. Well, anyway, Finland is kind of identifies as that its age is from 1917. So.
Well, I think, I want to thank you, Amos, for sharing your experiences, your life experiences, life in Helsinki and in Finland, what's new and unique, how it's been built over time. These are many of the issues that all of us in every country struggle with, but the combination that we're seeing in Finland and the results of 8 straight years as number 1 on the happiness chart says there's something in Finland that you guys are doing right we can probably all learn from. So Amos, thank you for sharing.
Thank you very much for having me.